CEO of Incheon International Airport Corporation, Mr. Paul Griffiths, the CEO of Dubai Airports, and Mr. Joseph Lopano, the CEO, recently appointed, of Tampa International Airport in the US. Please welcome Mr. Lee, Mr. Griffiths, and Mr. Lopano. Right, gentlemen, well, thank you for joining us, and Mr. Lopano, Joseph, and Paul for coming from so afar.
Pleasure.
Paul, you might be a bit shocked by the cold, and I suspect you are too, Joseph,
Yeah.
but the welcome is warm, I can assure you. I think I'd like to start with Angela's figures, really. We looked at the mix globally, 47% commercial or non-aeronautical, 53 traditional aeronautical. Within that, obviously some regional changes. Joseph, in your market, food and beverage, clearly much more important than duty-free retail. But I'd like just to set the scene by asking each of our CEOs what share of overall revenues do commercial revenues play for each of your airports. How has this changed? Is it changing like Angela's figures? Is it changing faster, slower? And how do you see it shaping up in the future? And to make a really long question out of it, what role does commercial play in funding your whole infrastructure growth and your CapEx needs? Maybe, Paul, we'll kick off with you. Give Mr. Lee a rest for a moment.
Sure, thank you, Martin. Commercial revenue is incredibly important to Dubai. If you take the revenue from duty-free and the revenue from non-aeronautical income, it's actually over $2 billion a year. On the airport side alone, our aeronautical revenue is about 600 million. So you can see the skew hugely in favor of commercial revenue. So you can imagine it gets a lot of our attention. I think the other thing is also the changing attitude to that split. We've had a policy for some time now to make changes to our aeronautical income, which are actually have trailed even inflation. So in real terms, our aeronautical charges per unit have actually declined. So again, further reinforcement of the fact that commercial revenue is hugely important for Dubai and is becoming more so.
Joseph, a different mix entirely. Joseph's also had extensive experience at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, and you might sort of give us a national view as well, Joseph, alongside Tampa. How do you see it?
Yeah, coming from DFW, we had 60 million passengers, and Tampa's a much smaller airport, 17 million passengers a year. But we still have a real focus on creating non-aeronautical revenues, okay? So only 25% of our revenue really comes from aeronautical sources. The rest comes from non-aeronautical sources. And I think DFW is a leader in that respect as well. I think from a national view, though, as you asked, I think that there's a lot more emphasis in the United States to really take some of the models that we're seeing working so well in other parts of the world. Paul and Mr. Lee's model is obviously very successful. And, I think that a lot of the airport management today is much more commercially minded in the U.S. and not as bureaucratic in the sense that we're really trying to recruit more entrepreneurial type people, more commercially minded people. And the result is what the airport's created for is more prosperity, lower cost, more airline flights, and that's what our role is. So,
just want to pick up on that number. 75% is non-aeronautical? Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really high. Where, is that food and beverage principally, or where's it coming from?
It's food and beverage, it's parking, it's other commercial rentals and so on. And we try to keep that basis pretty constant. And keep, our cost per plane passenger is around $5 and very, very competitive in the U.S.
Okay. I'll come to you, Mr. Lee. It's interesting to note, of course, Mr. Lee and Mr. Griffiths alongside me represent, I think, something like pretty much $3 billion worth of our duty-free industry. So there's a mighty big chunk of our market share sat in these next two chairs. A great duty-free pie there, Mr. Lee. What's your mix?
We have, in my airport, aeronautical and non-aeronautical, the ratio is about 65% for non-aeronautical and 35% is aeronautical. Out of some 65 non-aeronautical, commercial revenue is about 80%, particularly for duty-free shops. Therefore, at the moment we are, our revenue is, commercial revenue is about $700 million. The last 5 years, at the moment about 50% of the total our company's revenues. Therefore, 5 years ago it was about 34%, and the last 5 years about 22% growth every year, annually. Therefore now at the moment about 50% of total revenue is commercial revenues.
So if we could take these three airports and replicate them across our industry, we'd all be in great shape, ladies and gentlemen. All right, I want to talk to you about some of the barriers to business. One of the great frustrations I think retailers feel, and indeed consumers feel, is this conflict between the operational and the commercial. So often the retailers, the food and beverage operators, they complain about the impact on commercial dwell time of slow check-in, immigration, and of course security clearance, which has been the industry nightmare of recent years. How do you see getting the optimum balance between commercial and operational, and what do you do on behalf of your operators to try and maximize that commercial dwell time?
In Incheon case, I don't think some airport operation and commercial operation is conflicting relationship. I think they are helping each other. In my airport, how to make our passenger process faster. Therefore, even though ICAO recommendation is departure passenger about 60 minutes and arrival is 45 minutes, but Incheon Airport, we finish all the process in 16 minutes for departure and 12 minutes for arrivals. Therefore, we can save a lot of almost 1 hour. Therefore, those saved hour, we drive them, we guide them to the commercial areas, this duty-free shop, and they can enjoy in our shopping areas and the food and beverage, or enjoying of some cultural event as well.
Okay. Paul, same question.
I really think, actually, what you're describing, Martin, doesn't really exist. There is no physical barrier why operations and retail can't exist in perfect harmony. The reason, I think, is it's all in the mind. It's all an attitude. It's all a silo mentality. And I think you haven't got to look back very far in history to see why that is. Most airports within very recent living memory have been extensions of governments and very civil service in their attitudes. In fact, even those that have been fairly recently privatized, sometimes you wonder whether someone forgot to tell the airport management that they're no longer civil servants. So I think the thing is that some of the arguments that I hear in the airport fraternity and amongst the airlines as well is that that attitude is really not constructive to constructing the sort of lateral partnerships that are necessary for mutual success. The supply chain is in airports and aviation is hugely unbalanced, and that's because of these historical silos. And we are only going to improve that and maximize the much needed revenue that everyone needs to generate for the sector if we actually start to look along that supply chain laterally instead of remaining in those operational silos.
Because it is a critical issue. I was looking at a slide yesterday of Malaga Airport, for example. It's got a lovely commercial offer. and you want to see the picture of the queue at check-in is absolutely shocking. And not only are they late getting through, but they're mad as hell when they get through. They don't want to go and shop when they're feeling like that. They're deeply frustrated. So I suppose, Joseph, coming to you, that ever-present tension between the silos that Paul referred to is something you've got to grapple with if you're going to grow that side of the equation and serve your consumer better.
Yeah, I think Paul's use of the term silo is very appropriate. I think that in the U.S. model, the security checkpoints are run by the federal government, TSA. So very little control by airport management over how those are run. We have influence, but not control. So I think the right way to approach it is to create this teamwork attitude where we share information with the TSA, or more importantly, we enable our customers through technology to know whether there's a long wait. Because people, when they have information, react much better to the situation. When they get into a long line and they didn't know it was going to happen and they were going to miss their flight, they're very upset when they come through. So I think it's a matter of sharing information not only with the government agency, but also with the customers.
Do you have a good relationship with TSA, or is it fraught?
We have the best relationship in the entire United States. No, we have a very good relationship, and it's a relationship we value.
Excellent. All right. Well, I want to talk now about how we can outstrip the passenger growth curve. I was speaking to one of Mr. Lee's team the other day, and we were looking at projections for 2012, and I think, Mr. Lee, the traffic growth is anticipated maybe only 4 or 5% this year, but you're anticipating 14, 15% growth just in duty-free revenues alone. Now, if we have a flat year, let's say there's no traffic growth because something bad happens in this industry. I come back to my point, if we could just grow penetration by 1%, 2%, 3%, your revenues would grow without a commensurate increase in costs. How can airports help retailers and brands to really drive up the footfall and the penetration rates?
We do some joint customer behavior research periodically and share the information together with our some retailers. And also we providing some information and the joint marketing or promotion activities we do. And because we create some kind of airport brand, which is Airstar Avenue. Airstar, underneath of Airstar Avenue, all the small retailers or concessionaires working together as teams for joint promotion or marketing activity as well. And also we provide a lot of some good, well-trained employees as well who can speak Japanese or Chinese with major our customers. And those activities, I think, help a lot.
Okay. Paul, you have traffic growth, so it's a pretty hypothetical question to say if it was flat. But is traffic growth enough for you? Are you driven by increasing those footfall and penetration rates?
I'm more concerned about two things. One, the reason why penetration of duty-free and retail spend isn't higher than it is. And I think that's related to what you describe, actually, the attitude of mind that people find themselves in when they actually arrive in the terminal. And I think the very intrusive and completely unnecessary manual processes of check-in, security, and immigration that are plaguing us because of that sort of bureaucratic view is one reason why passengers are not spending. Interesting, my first visit to Incheon today, and I'm not saying this just because Mr. Lee's sitting next to me, I was wondering before I visited what the fuss was all about. Now I absolutely know what the fuss is about. It's an incredible facility, very well designed, great attention to detail, and the results speak for themselves. Comparable revenue from duty-free sales as Dubai, but with only 28.8 million passengers compared to our 51 million. So every passenger through Mr. Lee's airport is generating $50 per head, we're only getting 29. So I know different parts of the world, different spending patterns, but it can be done. You can boost penetration quite significantly, even on a lower passenger base. So we need to make the offer more attractive and timely. We need to get rid of that very intrusive manual process and really try and get the agencies responsible to be more motivated by service delivery and queuing times, etc. All those things that really will take the sting out of the airport journey so they have more time and are in a much better mood to spend. I think the other thing, Jack alluded to the threat of the internet, but the one thing the internet cannot possibly do is give you the tangible touch and feel product experience. Now, I'm wondering whether we need to rethink airport retailing a bit and say, if the internet is such a major sales channel, we can track sales trends through the internet, but for those tangible products that people really like to touch and feel, the airport could be that sort of experiential touch point to generate sales that actually the internet trails. So, I think there are many, many different ways of making quite significant inroads into increasing sales penetration and having a massive uplift in revenue, because the industry definitely needs it.
Right.
I think we can, Incheon, we can have a small duty-free shop operation for you.
Well, my colleague George Horan is here. My colleague George Horan is here. Perhaps Mr. Lee, you ought to have a word with him.
Well, there's an offer, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Joseph, same question.
Yeah, I think Paul brought up a lot of good points, and so did Mr. Lee. I think research is key, understanding what it is that'll make people. It's not necessarily good to just understand what people buy, but it's also important, as Paul said, to understand what people want to buy at an airport and what people want to buy on the internet. And so where do we find our unique niche for, and how do we engage, and I think Jack made a good point earlier, how do we engage the guys in the group to come in and spend some money? And I don't know what that is. If it's cheap water that gets them in the door, that's a strategy, right? If it's cameras or gadgets, that's a strategy as well. But I think that's an untapped portion. And research will tell you that you're not really penetrating that sector. And I think it's important to find out why.
Okay. I had a very interesting conversation with Mr. Lee last night, which I'm hoping he'll regale with us now. Your Rule 1 and Rule 2, Mr. Lee. And it relates to my question about how hands-on should airports be with regards to airport commercial services. One of the many criticisms that you hear of airports from retailers is that too many airports are passive landlords, if you like. I hate that term, landlord. I think it evokes something else. But how active should you be in, as airport companies, in tempting to the consumer, but also, I suppose, helping your retailers? And you said something particularly interesting last night on that subject.
This is another one. However, we suggest joint marketing activities together with the airlines and some concessionaire all together. We do visit of some China or Japan, small cities, and went there for joint operation, joint some promotional activities, and then a lot of passengers, they make them bid, and also some China or Japanese travel agency, they also bring a lot of passengers to our airport as well. The another one is to helping. We are not just sitting the for example, year 2008, it was some very tough situation because of economic downturn. When I took up this position year 2008, I announced 2 rules. One, as you said, rule one, number one, in my airport, we have about 500 retailer shops or everybody there. In my airport, whoever doing the business, we shouldn't make them make money, or we should not make them bankruptcy or losing money. That is rule number one. Rule number 2 is don't forget rule number 1. That's So I announced
Yeah.
that after that, it's a economic crisis coming. Therefore, all the passengers reduced and all shops are really suffering. Therefore, we had some rather internal board meeting or discussion with my teams. Then finally, we decided to giving them 10% discount, all of some revenues. From there, all the rentals, everything, we reduced them about 10%, which is about more than $200 million. And then all those, our tenant, they thought airport authority, they also always saying airport family, but never treat the real family. But they realized, airport authority, really they treat us as a family during the tough situations. Therefore, we became the one really small teams and win-win partnership, realize each other and helping each other and grow together. Now we are recovering everything very well.
Now you share the upside. There weren't too many airports around the world who indulged, if you like, in rental relief. So I think that's extremely commendable. I'll go to you now, Joseph, on the same question. How do you see yourselves at Tampa? You've got your concessionaires. How closely are you working with them, or you sit back and watch the money roll in?
I don't think you can ever sit back and just watch when it comes to something as important to the customer experience as food, beverage, and retail. I mean, the reality of it is when you measure your customer satisfaction ratings, an awful lot of that has to do with what the food, beverage, and retail, what the concepts are they appropriate, are they well staffed, are they managed well, and so on. So we try to be very involved in providing them with research and providing them with creating alliances for marketing, trying to find new ways to help them create sales. Because I always say, the airports in the U.S. are communes. I mean, basically everyone is successful if each other is successful. Okay, we're all just taking passengers that were created by airlines and trying to find a way to maximize revenue with an existing pool of people. So, and the other side of it too is that working with your concessionaires, you can, in the U.S., you can bring a lot of local flavor, same worldwide, bring some local flavor into the experience so that you help drive up tourism to your area. Okay, so that's another involvement that we have.
And Paul, I've seen some really good examples in recent weeks of you being anything but a passive landlord. The development of your mobile app, which I think is absolutely terrific. This whole sort of focus that Eugene Barry was telling me about, being with the consumer right through the journey, right through the airport, or even from before they get to your airport. You're really working hard on that, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is that the old days of airports just being passive landlords and signing up an onerous concession agreement, quite honestly, they are ancient history as far as we're concerned. We are doing an awful lot to try and innovate and understand and actually treat, I think, the retail, our retail colleagues with respect. They have expertise that airports don't have, and the idea of a contract with someone who has expertise is to create a partnership for mutual growth. And I don't think necessarily a concession contract has to be a difficult one. I think if it's properly negotiated by both parties, it can be extremely productive. But I think airports need to do an awful lot more to provide the appropriate level of research and intelligence on the customers coming through the airport. And that's rather difficult because actually most airports are not business-to-consumer businesses. They are actually business-to-business, and it's the airlines that have the consumer. So if the airline has the moment of truth with the consumer and all the data, they're sitting on one side of the airport, the retailers are on the other side of the airport. I think this is where this lateral partnership has got to take place, because if we could inspire some sort of confidence and broker the relationships across that whole supply chain, and get airlines dropping the pointless concept of in-flight duty-free, which is expensive, environmentally unfriendly, and a very flawed consumer proposition, in favor of a technologically driven buy on board when you've got 14 hours to consider your purchase and collect at your airport of arrival or airport of original departure when you get back. There's all sorts of opportunities here where data-driven decisions and innovation could be brought to bear if the supply chain was properly cooperative. So there's enormous opportunities for innovation.
Really interesting thought. Do you ever talk to your airlines about potential partnership?
All the time, yeah, all the time. And it's quite interesting how different the attitudes are. Sometime, I mean, one notable airline that I couldn't possibly name, but it's got the largest number of slots at Heathrow, has said to me in open conference, look, if we could share data, we could reduce your costs, improve revenue, and we would share the upside. And the response in open forum was, but if we share our passenger data with you, how do we know that you're not going to go off and use it for your own purposes? And I think that gave me the perfect illustration I was looking for of the exact problem we've got in this industry. People are unwilling to share. I've just come from the IATA conference in Singapore overnight, and I have to say the mood between what I've picked up this morning and what was in the room yesterday is absolutely chalk and cheese. It's all everyone else's fault, the industry's in peril, it's all doom and gloom, and some staggering statistics. 3.5 billion profits in the airline industry last year on a turnover of 600 billion. That's a 0.6% margin. And it gets better. Since 2001, the airlines have recorded $26 billion in losses on a turnover of $5.5 trillion. Now, it's no wonder that they are really focusing on their bit of the business when you've got those sort of numbers at play. You know, it's all turnover and no leftover. That's the problem.
Absolutely. You mentioned an interesting potential partnership, of course, getting that in-flight out of the sky and into your shops. They've got the captive audience, but not the ability to range product. You don't have the captive audience to the same extent, or not for so long, but you have all the space in the world, as it were. It would seem, if you started this industry all over again, it would seem a logical way to go. I hope Heather Cho's not in the audience from Korean Air, or she'll kill me. But is it a possibility with your airline partners? Could you persuade them?
Well, I think so. We've put a toe in the water when we introduced our stored value DXB card, which we're going to try and see if airlines will sell that on board. And if that's the case, then they have the stored value on the card and have the discount in all our outlets on arrival. And then the next step, I think, is getting actually a catalogue of what is available actually for sale on board. It's not difficult. The technology is there. It's all about openness of thought and getting down, getting over these barriers.
All right. Well, we're going to close out just with a couple of questions. We're very tight on time today because we've got to be away on buses tonight. So we're going to run it pretty tightly. But a couple of important questions in relation to the Trinity concept. Many brand owners in this room believe that they pay an unfair share in the so-called Trinity promotions, including some of the most high-profile ones of the last year that have been held up as wonderful examples of airports, retailers, and brands working together. You talk to some of those brands privately and they'll say, yeah, the problem is it looks good, but we're paying the lot. Do you think airports could do more to support those type of partnerships in contributing towards the cost of concourse promotions and Trinity promotions in general? Can you guys do more? We'll start with you, Joseph, this time.
Well, I think there's a lot of that has to be agreed to up front in a partnership fashion. I mean, you really have to understand how much of your revenues you're going to rededicate toward promotion and so on. So if you create promotional funds, with an understanding that X percent of the turnover and revenues will be placed towards promotion, there aren't any surprises later on. I think that's something that you got to really talk about and agree to up front.
Yeah, but the reality is if you give over your concourse and you get to that passenger and you delight them, and I've seen it happen at places like Changi Airport, for example, where they're just fantastic. visibility, and wow, you can make a difference. Everybody's going to win if the airport gives more. The problem is, I think too often it comes with a cost tag attached. Paul,
I think the thing is that really, again, it's play to your strengths. Retailers clearly are best placed to be able to make judgments about what works and what doesn't work and what are good ideas. And I think that what we've tried to do is take ideas that retail partners have had and brought to us, and we've tried some quite innovative multi-partnership things. And I think the thing is that people in an airport are looking for not just straight retail, they are looking for innovation, they are looking for service quality, they are looking for things that create an impression, and I think the retail environment plays a big role in that. But I don't really think that airports getting involved in stipulating what the terms of a promotion should be. Let's use the professional expertise in the retailer to come up with propositions, and I think airports have got to be very, very flexible in thinking through the commercial impact and what the terms need to be to make it a success. Again, I think no two promotions are the same. They should be negotiated intelligently on a case-by-case basis.
yeah, but the airport can certainly win at the end of the day in revenue terms. And for example, let's take for example, it could be airport advertising. It's, for a great Trinity promotion, you want to be shouting it from the rooftops from the time the passenger enters the airport. But that cost of advertising, often handled by a concessionaire, which complicates things, does tend to get in the way. Is that somewhere where the airports could be helping out?
Well,
saying, we'll take that cost.
I think the thing is that we do work very closely with the concessionaire on a similar basis. If there are promotions, we actually tend to put a package together with our advertising concessionaire. We've got particular carve-outs negotiated into the